And it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce 5 of this year's 6 Quick Reads authors. Katie Ford, who is the author of over 30, I think, Katie, delightful, funny, romantic novels. And she's a regular in the bestseller list, and she has written Saving the Day for us. Peter James, who's another regular in the bestseller list. I think you might be #1 at the moment, aren't you, Peter?
Yeah.
Yes. #1 with his thrilling crime novels that feature Detective Superintendent Roy Grace, who features in his quick read, Wish You Were Dead. Louise Candlish, who's an acclaimed writer of domestic noir and psychological suspense, and she has written us another nail-biter in The Skylight. Khurram Rahman, who is, I loved his first novels, East of Hounslow and Homegrown Boy, which feature, both of them feature Jay Kassim, who's up to his neck in trouble in The Motive. And finally, Owen Braithwaite, who sprang to the attention of the reading public with her fantastic first novel, My Sister, the Serial Killer, and equally dark and funny is her quick read, The Baby Is Mine. And sadly, Kathleen has not been able to join us. We're kind of pressed for time, so I'm going to talk both to all the readers about their individual quick reads and with a few general questions about reading and the occasional joy of writing as well, if we have time. And of course, there are questions at the end. So if you want to write your questions in the Q&A box, I should be able to pick them up at about 6:35. So that'd be great. So I'd like to start just with a general question to, I think, Louise and Khurram. Why do you think reading for pleasure is so important, and why quick reads are important as a result of that? Lou, why did you start?
Well, I think reading generally is special and unique. For me, it's the only thing that allows me to, completely escape myself and my troubles and just sort of put myself in someone else's world and someone else's shoes. And obviously, novels like mine, my full novels are really complicated, and structurally they're quite complex. So I think a quick read just kind of extends by millions the number of people who can share that pleasure of, just sort of escaping your own world and entering someone else's, in that totally immersive way. That's just such a joy. Great.
Khurram, can you add to that?
Yeah, I agree. Especially the escape, it's the ultimate escape. I think, just able to shut off from the rest of the world, from life's little stresses, family, your partner, work, and just disappear into a story. I mean, it doesn't get any better to be fully immersed into a book. I mean, the benefits are never ending, apart from the obvious, expanding your knowledge and your vocab. For me, I've never been a very confident person, and reading more I read, I feel more confident in life generally. Like right now, I've been talking to you guys with something I've struggled with in the past, and reading really helps me reach that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, to talk about 2 of the books, I'm going to turn first of all to Peter and ask you, Peter, to tell us a bit about Roy James, where he came from and what he's up to in Wish You Were Dead.
Roy Grace, you mean?
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Roy James.
Oh, did I? Sorry. Yes, I do. I do mean Roy Grace, sorry.
Yeah, Roy Grace is Detective Superintendent, Head of Homicide for Sussex Police, and we first meet him back in Dead Simple 17 books ago. And we discover that he's coming up to his 39th birthday. His wife, Sandy, who he loved and adored, had vanished off the face of the earth 9 years earlier on his 30th birthday. He'd come home to take her out to dinner and she was gone. And for 9 years, although he's continued to function effectively as a homicide detective, he's been dogged by his own personal puzzle of what happened to her. Was she kidnapped? Did she run off with a lover? Did she commit suicide? Did she have an accident? And the mystery slowly unfolds throughout the books as a kind of running backstory. Wish You Were Dead is the first time I've used him in a quick read, and that book is based on an absolute hotel from hell that my wife Laura and I stayed in 4 years ago, where we driving back from the south of France. We actually thought we were going to be murdered.
Really?
It was the creepiest place. We were the only people. It was a chateau the size of Buckingham Palace, and we were the only people in it. Our bedroom had this, it was this creaky, there were sort of dead animals in the garden. There was a sort of dog with its back legs collapsed, dragging itself around, about 18 mangy cats. You go in, there's suits of armor. Our bedroom had this semi-collapsed four-poster bed and an enormous crucifix on the wall. The whole of one wall facing the bed was a crucifix. And they played choral music as we went downstairs to dinner, like really, really loudly.
God, well, you've used it to good effect, is all I can say.
Thank you.
Well, it's a fantastic book. It's really exciting.
It was. I love the quick reads. I love doing the previous one, The Perfect Murder, because they give you a chance to explore something that might not work in a full-length novel. I would just like to add one very quick comment to the question before. I think one of the best quotes about the joy of reading came from George R.R. Martin. He said that the person who reads never reads, leads only one life. The person who reads leads 1,000.
Thank you. Owen, I'm going to turn to you now. The Baby Is Mine, the first lockdown novel I've read. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I wrote it in lockdown, and it's set during lockdown, which goes to show how creative I am. But I guess, it was in terms of, when I was approached to write quick reads, and I thought, okay, what am I going to write about? And I had been sort of, for some time, I had been playing with the idea of writing a contemporary sort of retelling of the story of Solomon and the two women, because that story just always, King Solomon always fascinated me, just because the woman who had lost her baby, her actions throughout that story are cruel. They're just terrible, and I'm drawn to the cruel and terrible because it's just, it provides you with just so much to work with, so but I couldn't figure out how to get around the issue of DNA, because obviously back then there wasn't any, but now it's easy to prove who's the mother of a child. And then the lockdown happened, and I had to get to writing my quick reads, and it's sort of, unfortunately hospitals were tied up, labs were tied up, everybody was busy, and it came to me that might be my workaround in terms of the story that I wanted to write for some time. So the story is basically about a young sort of player guy called Bambi, who gets tossed out of where he's staying with his girlfriend. His girlfriend throws him out, and he ends up in his late uncle's house stuck there with his auntie, his uncle's mistress, and a baby they both claim is their own. So that's generally what it's about.
It's wonderful. I thoroughly recommend it. Now, another general question. Katie, why did you want to write a quick read?
I was so flattered to be asked, actually, because I'd always felt that my books were sort of too middle class and quite restricted. I suppose you never admire your own work, do you? Because you just always assume, oh no, no one will want to read mine. So when you asked me, I was terribly flattered, because I just think it is a terrific scheme. And I suffered quite badly from dyslexia myself, so I was slow to learn to read. And I can remember the process. Most people can't remember learning to read because they did it so young that they just can't remember doing it. But I do remember struggling trying to read the word said when I've been told to spell out the words S-A-I-D. And I thought, how does that ever say said? And then I thought, last time I read this word, it was said, and I worked it out that you don't have to actually sound it out. You can just look at a word and remember. And subsequently, it was discovered that I was quite dyslexic. And I realised that dyslexic people don't read in quite the same way as other people do. So I really understand struggling to read. But what I also learned quite early on is that you don't have to read every word to get the story. So you don't have to be a great reader to enjoy a good story. But of course, the more words you do understand, the better it gets. So I just thought, if I can help someone to get that sense of reading a story and getting the pleasure from it without being able to read every word or finding reading a struggle, that would be a really great thing to do. And so I was really excited to do it, although a bit terrified, because I thought, oh, I'll never find an idea that's just the right size. It's like with a short story. They're lovely to do, but you have to have an idea that just takes that length of time to write. It's not like a novel when you can ramble on or, you know, play around with it. You have to be much more disciplined. But
you did find the idea.
I did do it in the end, yes.
Brilliantly, too. Oyen, I was going to come to you actually and ask you why you particularly were interested in writing a quick read.
I think, I mean, I was moved by what you're trying to do, and I when readers DM me or tweet at me or approach me in person and tell me that my book got them through a reading slump, or that they usually didn't like to read and they just picked it up in a whim and now they're reading again, or they just found it easy to digest. I remember I saw a tweet where someone was talking about her dad who had suffered from a stroke, I think in 2018. And he hadn't really been reading since then, but he found the short chapters of My Sister the Serial Killer just really easy to digest. And I feel like quick reads is that, but on crack. So it's just a brilliant way to help people to. And then, during lockdown as well, I mean, I'd already agreed to do this by then, but I found that during lockdown, with everything that was happening in the world, I was struggling to focus on longer works of fiction. So I was reading a lot of novellas. I read a couple of quick reads myself. I read a lot of short stories. That was all I could handle at that time. So it's not every day that you will be able to sit down and read The Count of Monte Cristo or whatever. It's not every day you'd be able to sit down and read a really big book, but you can pick up a novella quite easily.
Lucky for us, in that case, an upside of lockdown. Louise, tell us about The Skylight and where that sort of originated.
Well, The Skylight, I suppose, is inspired by Rear Window, Hitchcock's Rear Window. And it came out of a meeting, actually a work meeting, where we were talking about those sorts of plots, with voyeurs watching other people. And someone in the room said that their neighbour had just had a skylight put in to their kitchen extension, and that she could see everything going on in this kitchen. She could see what they were eating for every meal. She could, she could almost lip read their conversations. And that stayed with me. That was a few years ago, and that stayed with me. So when I was trying to come up with that perfect quick read size of an idea, I remembered that. And so I came up with the story of Simone, who lives in a top floor flat. She's quite a strange character and she does quite strange things. And one of the things she's sort of addicted to is watching her neighbours through the skylight of their kitchen. And she can do this because she's got this kind of glass that looks frosted on from their side, but from her side, she can see through it in the normal way. And it's kind of harmless, I suppose, a bit creepy, but no one knows she's doing it. Her boyfriend, who lives there with her, doesn't know. And so all is, I guess, okay, until one day she looks down through the skylight and she sees something that makes her really angry. And, this is a mini thriller, so I think it's fair to say that she overreacts to what she sees.
I think that is very fair to say. Khurram, tell us about J. Kasim and where he came from and why you wanted to write, and a bit about the motive.
I always give away so much. I'm going to try to keep
I'll stop you.
Yeah, I always give the ending away. Okay, so the motive revolves around two best friends who operate on different sides of the law. One is Jay, the drug dealer. His best friend Idris is a cop. They both end up at a house party. Jay's there because he wants to make some money, saw some dope. Idris is there because of a noise complaint. Amongst them is an ex-convict who crashed a party, and he will stop at nothing to get revenge on a young student. The inspiration behind the motive was to really talk about subjects that we don't really see in books, such as police brutality, interracial relationships, and even Brexit is set to the backdrop of the Brexit referendum. So I want to cover these subjects we don't really see very often.
Where did you find him as a character in the very first place?
I grew up with 1,000 Jays, you know, all around me in Hounslow. This character, this larger than life, colourful character. He's the kind of person that if he turns up at a gathering, you're annoyed by him. But if he's not there, you kind of miss him. You know, he's that kind of person, and he's almost an everyman man. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of Jay in all of us.
Oh God, I hope not.
No, I think there is. I think the way, especially the mistakes he makes, the way he stumbles across solutions, you know, he's not your typical hero. He feels real to me.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for writing it. Now, another question to all of you. Can you think, Peter, of a particular example of how reading has influenced or changed your life, or somebody you know, what difference it's made to somebody being able to read?
Many, actually. I had a letter, an email quite recently from a woman saying that her husband hadn't been able to hadn't read a book for like 30 years, and had picked up my earlier quick read, and from that it had got him back into reading, and he was kind of sick with cancer, and it had just given him a whole new lease of life. And I thought that was incredibly moving. And I mentioned off camera earlier an extraordinary lot of the previous quick reads when we had the big launch event and people were present, and this lady who was about 60 came up to me and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I've been dyslexic all my life and I've never been able to read anything in public because the only thing I could read would be a child's book. And now with the quick reads, it's changed my life, because I can actually sit on the beach or on a deck chair by a swimming pool and read a book and not feel ashamed that I'm reading something for a 5-year-old. And I think that's been one of the wonderful things that quick reads have done. And I think also I give a number of talks in prisons. I've been to Downsview, where the lady's guest is from. And I mean, I think that the tragic indictment of our education system is that the average reading age for prisoners in British prisons is, for 50% of the inmates, is below 11 years old. And the quick reads certainly helps them, because as the slogan of the reading agency goes, when we read, everything changes.
Absolutely. Lou, what about you?
Well, reading had a huge impact on me, actually, when I was, believe it or not, when I was about 12.
I don't believe this story.
I don't believe anything I say, but I was kind of semi-delinquent. I got in trouble with the police and with the authorities at school, and my parents grounded me for a whole summer. And so the whole of the school's summer holidays, which, as you know, when you're that age, they're incredibly long, and it's a long time to not see your friends. And but I was allowed out to the library, and so I went every single day, and having not really been into reading or understood what all the fuss was about, I suddenly had nothing else. And by the end of that summer, I must have read 100 books. I think I read all of the Barbara Cartlands and Agatha Christie's, and all of these sort of big series of books that I could get my hands on. And I think I was changed by that, because I appreciated those what we were talking about earlier, those worlds that you can share when you read, and those as Peter said, those thousands of lives that you can have as well as your own, and it wasn't all about me. So I at that time had no idea I would become a writer, but I definitely became a reader, and I feel really passionate about encouraging everyone to have that kind of epiphany with reading.
Thank you. She will. The annoying thing about that story is she will never tell us what it was she did.
I'll tell you when I next see you. I'll tell you privately.
Oh, okay. Finally, we come to Saving the Day by Katie. Katie, tell us about the book and what happens in it, and so on.
Well, I wanted to write this book partly because I discovered, courtesy of my daughter, that there's a whole lot of people who can't cook at all. And they've never learnt to cook. They don't teach it at school anymore. And if your grandmother, your mother, all these people, the women in your lives who traditionally would have taught you to cook, are all out working long hours, no one knows how to cook in a household. So I just thought it would be fun to show, to write a story about someone who just learns to cook a very few things, and it can change their life. And my character, she's in a boring job in a supermarket. She's slightly bullied by her work colleagues. And every day she walks home past this cafe, and in this cafe, everyone seems to be having fun. All the workers are chatting and the customers are all happy, and lovely smells waft out as the door opens. And she thought, I really want to work there. And one day she sees their advertising for help, and without giving herself time to think, she goes in and asks for a job, and they say, I'm sorry, can you cook anything? And she said no. But fortunately, she meets someone who does know how to cook and teaches her very few simple things. And so she can go and get a job in the cafe, and her life really changes for the better because she just learns a little bit of cooking. And while it's not quite the same as reading, cooking, just being able to cook something does make your life a bit better. And so I just thought you can change your life by doing something quite small. You don't have to have a major volte-face change to change your life. It can be something quite little, like learning how to make soup or pancakes or something quite simple. And so that's what my story is about.
And we should also add that the recipes for those pancakes and that soup, etc., are in the back of the book.
They are. I did actually have to borrow someone else's cheese scone recipe because although I make them all the time, I don't have a recipe. And I couldn't quite be bothered to sort of say, well, what am I doing? I just tip the flour in, it's about enough. And then I add the grated cheese, but I don't know how much it is, and a dollop of something, and some yogurt. And I just make them. And they're always the same, but I don't know how I make them. And I couldn't be bothered to work it out. So I borrowed Nick Nairn's recipe for cheese scones. I
haven't tried them yet, but I will. Definitely.
They're very good.
Now, final question to you all. We're this year with Quick Reads, we're asking the public to buy a book, and for each one that's bought, the reading agency, with the support of the publishers, are giving one to help somebody discover the joy of reading. And I was going to ask you what your message would be to get people who are watching today to head to a bookshop or bookshop.org and buy a QR, or preferably all 6 of them. Peter.
Oh, I love that when people leave books in villas and in hotel rooms, or when people leave books for others to discover. And I think my message would be, if you're going to go to a bookshop, do buy the Quick Reads, because it's going to be a gift to people you've never met who will get such richness from it.
Katie, would you like to, can you add to that?
I think people don't realise what good technology books are. You can drop them in the bath, you can abuse them terribly. They will always work for you unless they actually catch fire. And they're so light, you can carry them anywhere. I want people to know that a book is always your friend. We have a motto in this house, which is always take a book. And my husband cut his hand savagely and nearly bled to death. But when he went to hospital, he tucked a book into his pocket, and therefore he was fine because he had something to read. If you've got something to read, you can cope with anything.
Thank you. Oyen or Khurram or Lou, do any of you want to add to that?
I mean, me personally, I started to read very late in life. I think almost over 30 years old before I started to properly read. After I left school, I was put off from reading totally. I mean, at school, the books and the curriculum, I didn't find it interesting. I couldn't relate to them. I found the language awkward. So after school, I said, I'm done with books. I'm not going to read books. It's not for me. And it took about 10, 12 years before a friend put a book in my hand and said, you have to read this. You know how you get those pushy people, annoying. You have to read this book. So reluctantly, I started reading this book. He knows me, he knows my taste. And from the first page, I was totally immersed into it. So sometimes it's about having the right book in your hand to get that passion in the first place. And I think this is what we're trying to do here, aren't we? Trying to, the books we've all written, I've read most of them. I think they're such a great starting point for readers that struggle. And for £1, you know, it can change your life. Yeah,
that's great. Oyen, Lou? Or shall
I would just say that I think they're so shareable. They're kind of bite size, and I mean, only today I went up to my daughter's bedroom. She's dyslexic as well, Katie, and slipped one on her bed. I mean, I just feel like they're the kind of books where you're not sort of presenting a huge challenge. It's you know, they're really they're little, and that you can pop them in your bag, and when you've finished you can pass on to someone else. And it's not just someone whose reading age might be lower than average. It's people who haven't got time to read, or as Oyen said, in a reading slump. I think quick reads are for huge numbers of people, not just the obvious. So they're just eminently shareable, I think.
Oh, that's nice. Oyen, have you anything to add, or shall I?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think Katie almost killed it there, because you know, even if you're bleeding profusely, you know, buy a book. It could save it. You know, it could save a life. And for only £1, as Khurram said, for only £1 you can save a life. So you know, I think everybody should give that a go.
Thank you. Well, I think we have got some questions in the Q&A. So if any of you out there want to ask a question, do type it in now. I'm going to see if I can make it work. Here we go. Okay, Anne McGahey asks, is it more difficult to write a quick read book than a novel? Shall we start with Katie?
Yes, I would say yes, in a way, because you have to think about it a bit more. You can't allow yourself to deviate from the story at all. It's more like writing a long, short story, because you have to really focus. You can't just do a little bit of description or have a little bit of jolly conversation that doesn't do anything. You have to really focus. And I think it's terrific discipline. And I think even writers who aren't asked to write quick reads should all try doing them, because it just keeps you on track. And so, yes, I think they are harder. And I feel I learned a lot from doing mine.
Thank you. Did anybody find it excruciatingly hard, or even incredibly easy?
That's someone's doorbell.
That's mine.
I found it easier. I found it easier because my novels are really complex, and I kind of almost make a point of making them complex. So I loved that kind of streamlining of the plot. And as Katie says, it's that discipline. There's no subplots. There's no characters who, you know, there's no red herrings and characters who come in and out for your own sort of indulgence. Every line matters. And then, of course, you know, you've got a literacy editor who I think we're going to hear from a little bit later, you know, keeping you on the straight and narrow. So really interesting experience. But for me, it was easier and more enjoyable.
Anybody else?
I guess I love that it is pure storytelling. And I think, I can't remember who it was who said, I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. If I had more time, I'd have written you a shorter one. And it's a great lesson for all writers. You know, I think that that I always have that invisible sign in front of me when I write, which is less is more. And it's a very, very pure form of storytelling, the quick reads. You know, as you say, Louise, there is no time for kind of subplots or extraneous characters. It's pure narrative.
Yeah.
And I think that's a terrific discipline for us all to do.
Yeah, that's great. Now here's a question from Linda, who asks, I hope this isn't going to provoke any difficulties. How have family and friends reacted to the author's quick reads? Owen, has your family reacted? You can say pass if you.
I think when I first, when I was still writing it, or I think towards the end of writing it, I read out the first chapter or so to my mum, and she loved it. My mom she's very much, she likes, I think quick reads are well up her alley. You know, she really does she prefers easier reads, even though she will read a novel-sized novel, but she likes romances. I also think Katie Ford's books, she would love Katie's book. She loves romances and that kind of just easy, no need for stress. Her life is busy enough, but she really, really liked it. She hasn't had a chance. Like I told her, when the book is out, I'll gift her the book, so she hasn't read the entire story, but she really liked what she read.
Oh, that's great. Corinne, how's yours gone down?
Yeah, actually, my mum as well. I gave her a copy like I do with all my other books. She said she picked it up because she's proud of me and read the first page, but she doesn't read very often, and this was the perfect book for her. I think she goes, I just read the first page, second page, and kept going and going, and within 2 days I think she'd finished the whole thing, texting me every so often, asking me questions about it. I think that's the first book she's read in years, and yeah, you know, she loved it, but she would say that obviously.
You haven't, no friends. Well, I suppose it's too early really for friends. What about you, Lou? Or
well, when I had some advanced copies, I was visiting my dad, and I gave him and my brother copies. And when I saw them the next day, they both read it. They both read The Skylight and loved it. They're both huge crime readers, but they both said the same thing, interestingly. And I think it says more about them than it does about me, that they would have preferred a slightly different ending. So I'm very keen to hear what the first readers think of the ending, because it's, in a way, it's quite an unusual ending for me.
Well, it's one of those last sentence endings, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I think that you know, it could go one of two ways, and the way I chose might not be the way people would expect.
Yeah, interesting. Peter, Katie?
A long time ago, I learned to stop worrying what my family and friends would think. I remember when my first ever novel was published, a terrible spy thriller called Dead Letter Drop, and I had this quite gross sex scene in it, in which my character had to seduce this lady in order to get information. And my biggest worry when the book was published was, what would my mother think? Because it was quite an explicit sex scene. And the book came out, and I proudly gave a copy to my mother, and about 4 days later I went round and I said, and she said, oh, I finished the book. And I said, oh, what did you think, Mum? I said, could you ask your publishers to take your date of birth off the back cover, because people will be able to work out I'm over 40.
Oh dear. Now, Katie, I'm going to start you off with a new question from Sarah Jade Virtue. Did any of the questions, sorry, can't even read. Did any of the authors get so into their characters for the quick reads that they wish they'd have saved the story for their next full-length novel?
That's a very good question. Actually, I didn't, because when I was thinking of the story, I deliberately kept it small. But I do think about my character quite a lot. I'm very fond of her because I think because she's a bit younger than my characters often are, I feel very maternal towards her. And there's a character in the book that I see myself as being that character. And so I'm very fond of Ali. But actually my husband, who doesn't read my books on the whole, read my quick read, obviously because it didn't take long, and he liked it. And then when my granddaughter said she wanted to read it, she's not really a reader and she is only 11 or 10, 11. she's not a great reader, but she wanted to read one of my books. And so I think this is probably a good one for her to read because it's shorter and she will be able to, she won't give up. One of my whole books would be rather daunting for her, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to her reading it because I think she might like it. And then she can say she's read one of her grandmother's books, because people are always asking, the poor dear children.
Oh God, poor thing. What about anybody else? What about you, Owen? Did you feel tempted to take the character into a longer novel?
Not particularly, but I think the more than the character, I think the plot. At some point, I thought, gosh, could I actually flesh this out, into a full? I did think about that. But in terms of the character, what was interesting about my main character is that he's male, and I generally write. I tend to favor female protagonists. So it also gave me an excuse to try to write from a male perspective, again, and see how I felt about it.
That was interesting.
And Bambi is a great character, by the way. Fantastic character.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? Kurum and Peter have already, obviously, their characters do already belong in longer novels. Lou?
Well, actually, it's a brilliant question, because you do sort of quite quickly develop a, kind of relationship with your main character, don't you? And you sort of get into their heads really quickly. And as I was writing, I did start to think exactly that. Oh, maybe I should have saved Simone for, something more, a full-length novel, because she was so strange and interesting to me that I felt I could take her in other dark and dangerous directions. And so it felt like, a shame in a way that I couldn't, sort of explore her a bit more. But she can always return in another quick read or in a short story, or perhaps as a kind of walk on in a novel. But I wasn't expecting to become so attached to her. I thought, I'll write this really quickly. I'll have a plan and I'll stick to it. And I didn't really expect to love her as much as I did.
That's great. Now, Anne McGahey back again. How quickly can you write a quick read? Was it quite fast for you, or did you find it interminable?
You'd think it'd be quite straightforward. I mean, I wrote 3 books in 3 years. It's about a year a book. Then this opportunity came to me. I thought, 10,000 words, easy, right? But it took me a long time.
20,000.
Mostly because I was I think I was 50 pages over, or about 5,000 words more than, it was 10,000 words, wasn't it? 20,000 words. Yeah, I was at 5,000 words over, and the editing process was particularly painful, because I think I packed a lot into the book. So yeah, I mean, you'd think a quick read is quick to write, but it took me about 3 months, I think, and painful at times, but rewarding.
Anybody slower or faster than 3 months?
Mine took 2 months.
I don't think mine could have taken all that long, or I wouldn't have managed to get my other book done. But I did have to go on holiday to write it. Fortunately, just before it all hit, we had arranged to go to Gran Canaria for a week. And I thought, well, I'll use that time to write, because I always write when I go on holiday, because I'm always inspired by different surroundings. So I write for a certain amount of time, and then while my husband explores the area, and then we go and do stuff the rest of the time. And it did take me that week to just, I think, rough it out. And then obviously loads of editing and fiddling about and what's have you afterwards. So I think it probably took me about 6 weeks, I think. I can't really remember, to be honest.
Oh, anybody shorter than 6 weeks? Surely not.
I don't know how long it took. I know it didn't take me very long, because I don't know if you remember, Fanny, but I couldn't decide on what story, because I know that.
Oh, I do, yes.
Yeah, I couldn't decide on what story, and I kept changing my mind. So I would start another story and be like, I don't like this. I'm not sure where it's going. And then I would start a different one. So by the time I really got into The Baby Is Mine, my deadline was upon me. I don't know how close it was, but I know that time was running out. So, but I don't remember exactly how long.
Okay, I've been given a 2-minute warning. Somebody's asking, how do we order the buy one, give one? I think Lily will correct me if I'm wrong at the beginning of the second half, but I think simply you just buy it. I mean, you buy it from bookshop.org or a local retailer.
Does the buy one, gift one count for ebooks as well as for physical books?
I think I'm going to ask Lily to answer that, because actually I don't know the answer to that at the beginning of the next bit. Does the Peter James quick read slot into the Roy Grace novel series, the Roy Grace series somewhere, or can we read it at any point? Love his novels. Peter.
That's pretty nice. Thank you, Book Fairies. You can read it at any point. It actually slots in between Find Them Dead and the new one, Left You Dead. So it's kind of August, takes place roughly August 2019. So somewhere, if you read it somewhere between the last 2 or 3 books, it's fine. It's not going to give too much away though, but if you read it at any point.
Thank you. Patrick Mann asks how much editing goes on with the quick reads books. I think that is going to be answered in the next half. The authors' editors edit their books with my involvement, and then they end up going to a literacy reader who's going to be talking soon. I'm just quickly scrolling through because I know we're running out of time. I think I'm going to have to stop, I'm afraid. But thank you for all your questions. And thank you, 5 of you, I'm trying to get rid of this. Lou, Peter, Kurum, Owen, and Katie. Thank you very much indeed, both for your books and for your time in being on this panel.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. You've been brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fanny.